So the tier list video a couple weeks ago went pretty well, so we're going to run it back with a new one. We're going to take every #1 overall draft pick since 2000 and put them into a tier list, ranging from all-time great all the way down to Jamarcus Russell. I'll give you a second to decipher what that ranking is for. The only ground rule for this video is that I am only considering what the player did for the team they started with. So I am not considering what Baker Mayfield is doing right now for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Only his time as a Brown will be considered. With that out of the way, let's go. Kicking things off, we have the 2000 first overall pick in pass rusher Courtney Brown from the Cleveland Browns, ironically, and unfortunately he is going to have to go into the disappointed tier. Now this is a player that had he gone in like the 3rd or 4th round, he would have been thought of as having a respectable career. He wasn't a completely horrible player, but he definitely did not live up to the hype of being a first overall pick. He was at best an okay rotational pass rusher, and this is the draft that had Tom Brady in it, but I am not going to shame a team for not picking the guy who went 199th overall first. And Courtney Brown is by no means Jamarcus Russell level bad, but he did not do enough to justify going first overall, so he belongs in the disappointed tier. Okay, Michael Vick, this is where things get interesting. Look, as a soon-to-be VT alum, I'm always going to have love for Michael Vick, but it does need to be stated that his career did not really pan out the way it looked like it was going to. Athletically at quarterback, he was a complete one of one at the time, doing things that we hadn't seen since maybe Randall Cunningham, and even then, those two weren't exactly the same type of mobile quarterback, if that makes any sense. Vick was great for a little bit, made multiple postseasons, made a conference championship, but this is where things really need to be talked about when it comes to Michael Vick. This is going to sound kind of weird, but I think Madden has completely blown Vick's passing ability out of proportion. It is always talked about how much of a cannon of an arm Michael Vick had and how much arm talent he had, but if we're being blunt, when you think about it, it doesn't really show in the stats. He was never a super effective passer in Atlanta, and even when he was in Philadelphia, which even then isn't going to be counted, I believe the most amount of passing touchdowns he ever threw in a season was 21, which is nothing special, and that's his peak. Now, obviously with the Falcons, his career was cut short due to the couple of years he had to spend in prison, so we'll never know how great he could have been, and I do believe if you took his athleticism in Atlanta and his refined passing game in Philadelphia and combine that into one player, I think you might have a Hall of Famer. But we never got to see it because A, Vick had to go to jail for a little bit, and B, if we're being honest, he never really put in the extra effort necessary to become a great passer. Vick believed that he could just coast on his athleticism into his late 20s, and once his mobility started to wear down, then he'd figure out how to throw the football. And because of that, I do think Michael Vick belongs in the inconclusive tier. Next up is David Carr, the first ever draft pick for the Houston Texans, and this is another man that will sit right next to Courtney Brown in disappointed. I'm not too sure how good he could have been if the Texans managed to build him an offensive line. Him getting absolutely flattened into the dirt is what his career is most known for. Although looking back, I think some of that is him holding on to the ball for too long. Had Tony Baselli, their first ever pick in the expansion draft, panned out, maybe it wouldn't have gone that way. But David Carr was nothing special as a quarterback and definitely not the franchise booster they were looking for. 2003 was Carson Palmer's time to go first overall. I made a video on this guy a while ago, and he was really good as a Bengal, although that devastating injury in 2005 sort of cut things short. But he was a Bengal for a while until he eventually grew tired of that franchise. And while he was by no means a savior, and you could argue his best time in the NFL was when he was a Cardinal, he was competent enough to make the Bengals relevant again, which should tell you something because that franchise hadn't made the playoffs in over a decade when Palmer had gotten there. So he is the perfect representative of the cool I guess tier. Eli Manning. This is where I kind of had to mince my words when it comes to the ground rule. This is the reason why I didn't say it has to be with the team that drafted them and why I said the team he started with. I know Eli Manning was drafted by the San Diego Chargers and he never played for them, but I'm going to consider his career as a Giant when making this video because it's where he ended up. Now, look, I've sort of hinted at this before. I could go on and on about what I really think about Eli Manning. Psst, he's overrated. But at the end of the day, 2 Super Bowls, 2 Super Bowl MVPs, beat Brady and Belichick twice, Do I think he should be in the Hall of Fame? No, but he is going to make the Hall of Fame because he beat Brady and Belichick twice in the Super Bowl, even though a lot of that was the defense. Whatever, hating stuff aside, Eli Manning is still a franchise savior for the Giants, not the Chargers. 2005, the second time the San Francisco 49ers picked a quarterback over a soon-to-be all-time great. This one was Alex Smith. I don't know if any player, other than a guy we'll get to later, is a perfect representative for one tier as Alex Smith is with the cool I guess tier. His career started off about as poorly as it could have. And I think if Alex Smith had the start to his career in today's NFL, he wouldn't have even gotten a second chance. He probably would have been out of the league in like 2 to 3 years. But the 49ers stuck with him for a while as they rotated through coaches and personnel, and things finally clicked in 2011 when the 49ers reached the NFC Championship. And it looked like they were on path to do that and then some in 2012 until he got injured, and then Colin Kaepernick took over and Smith never played as a 49er again. Maybe he could have been a franchise savior if he stuck it out in 2012 and potentially gotten over the hump, but his career was mostly weak outside of that 1 year. But one NFC Championship run is all it takes to separate you from here to here. 2006, perhaps one of the more forgotten first overall picks is Mario Williams, and sorry for the crappy picture, but he is also going to go into the cool I guess tier. This is another thing with hindsight where the 2006 draft wasn't really all that considering where the careers of Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, and Vince Young ended up. So Mario Williams was the right pick. He did have a couple of really good years in Houston before he took the money in Buffalo. He's by no means a Hall of Famer, but getting 26 sacks from 2007 to 2008 is very impressive, and he had 3 excellent years as a Bill too, which obviously doesn't count. If Mario Williams had stuck it out in Houston forever, honestly, his upside could have been all the way up here. His greatness was sporadic, so he belongs next to Alex Smith and Carson Palmer. Next up, the one and only Jamarcus Russell, and you'll never believe this, he's going to go into the Jamarcus Russell tier. Maybe the biggest draft bust in NFL history, the man who was so addicted to Wendy's Baconators, he wouldn't study film, he was overweight, he was out of the league in only 3 years, and it doesn't get any better when you realize that they could have had Calvin Johnson, or Joe Thomas, or Adrian Peterson, or Patrick Willis, or Marshawn Lynch. And look, it just goes on and on. The 2007 NFL Draft is honestly one of the best in NFL history, and the Raiders had the first overall pick and used it on him. Going from a quarterback to an offensive lineman in 2008, the first overall pick was Miami's Jake Long, who was elite for a couple of years, and I don't really have any stats to rifle off for Jake Long because he was an offensive lineman, but injuries did cut some of his career short. So while he, again, this is kind of similar to Mario Williams in a way, except it wasn't really with injuries. Had Jake Long been able to play out a full career, he could have been all the way up here in the Hall of Fame, but his time as a Dolphin was cut short. He didn't really get to play out a whole 14, 15-year career that an offensive lineman tends to be able to if they're at full health. So he is also going to have to be in the cool I guess tier. Matthew Stafford. The man has been at the center of several heated debates over the last decade. Some will tell you that he was an overrated stat patter, and some will tell you that he's one of the best to ever do it who just never got the proper supporting cast. And as always, the true answer lies somewhere in the middle. Look, here's the thing with Matthew Stafford. I think asking him to win a Super Bowl for Detroit was a bit too big of an ask, so I wouldn't consider his career a failure in that sense as a Lion, but you can't, come on, you can't win one playoff game. You can't win one. I do think that has to be taken into account, but I won't give him too much crap for it because after all, he went to Detroit and turned them into winners and turned them into a team that was at least worth watching. So I think that alone puts him into the franchise savior tier. Next, you had, if glass bones were a quarterback, in Sam Bradford. He was a rookie of the year and had some moments, but unfortunately, the poor guy could not stay healthy as a Ram, and it did not help that at a certain point in his career, his head coach was the one and only Jeff Fisher, who was obviously known for making the most out of whatever quarterback is given, am I right? With that being said, I think he could have been something great had he been able to stay healthy, but we never got to see it. And unfortunately, his legacy will be a high-volume, high-turnover quarterback who is injured all the time. So he is going to have to go in disappointed. The 2011 draft is another one of the greatest of all time, and the first overall pick was none other than Cam Newton. I'm going to be straight to the point. He belongs in the franchise savior tier. He is not quite a Hall of Famer because his prime was really short and it was kind of sporadic. never made the, I don't think he ever had back-to-back winning seasons, which is kind of crazy looking back on. And it's kind of sad the way his career ended, because I thought in 2018, there was a time where Cam Newton was lighting it up. He beat my Ravens half to death in 2018, and it looked like he wouldn't win MVP because of what Patrick Mahomes was doing. But there was kind of a thought of, hey, let's not overlook what Cam Newton's doing right now. But then against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he injured his shoulder and was never the same guy. So had he, again, I've said this a few times already, had he been able to play out a full career, maybe, just maybe, he could have been up here had he had a little late resurgence, but we never got to see it because of what happened to his shoulder. And I do firmly believe if that never happened, we would have been able to see greater things, because I know he came back in, I think, 2022, and he was obviously a complete shell of himself, but I do want you to go back and watch Cam Newton's second stint with the Panthers. Athletically, the dude still had it. Like, he could still run it into his 30s, but his arm was completely shot, so he was basically ineffective. So that prevented him from being an all-time great, but he did make the Carolina Panthers relevant after it seemed like they were the biggest black hole in the league. So I will put him as a franchise savior. Andrew Luck. I almost would have put him in inconclusive, because he is another, once again, I have to say this again, I feel like a broken record. Had his career played out, he absolutely was going to be an all-time great. But injury after injury stalled his career, and then he had to be stuck with an incompetent franchise that did whatever it took to run his career into the dirt until it was over. They finally got it right in the last year of his career and made it look like Andrew Luck was going to become one of the greatest to ever do it. But unfortunately, he got hurt again, and he decided it was just one rehab too many, and then stepped away from the game and never came back, even though it seemed like he might at some point. So unfortunately, Andrew Luck is only a franchise savior. But I do firmly believe that with a few more years of his play, he would have been an all-time great. The fact that he is on the Hall of Fame ballot at all, with how short his career is, should be applauded. Probably the most forgotten first overall pick of all time is up next, and that is Eric Fisher, the offensive tackle who went to the Kansas City Chiefs. The 2013 NFL Draft is another one that is known for being notoriously awful, and with that in mind, I actually don't think Eric Fisher was too bad. He was by no means a game changer. He did not separate himself from the pack in terms of being an offensive lineman. He is like offensive tackle Alex Smith. He might be the most cool, I guess, player ever. Now, it does need to be stated that he was by no means an all-time great. He was by no means a star. I don't even know if he ever made a Pro Bowl in his career, but it does need to be stated that given what happened to Mahomes in Super Bowl 55 against the Buccaneers, I don't think the Chiefs win that first Super Bowl without him at left tackle being able to hold down the fort against the 49ers. So that alone is able to get him out of the disappointed tier. He was serviceable, and for an offensive tackle, that's perfectly fine. Although, as a first overall pick, of course, you'd want more. Jadeveon Clowney, this is another hindsight instance where there is a player that you would obviously pick ahead of Clowney given a redraft. This isn't one where I would slander the Houston Texans for picking him first overall, because he was pretty good for a while. He bounced around the league, had a couple of good years. He was good in Seattle. He had a great 2023 in Baltimore, and he's having a pretty good 2024 in Carolina. He's still hanging around. He's had a really good career. Not enough to be a franchise savior since he didn't spend long enough with his first team. But Clowney has had a very solid time in the NFL. And honestly, it's one where if he racked it up for long enough and had a couple more dominant seasons, he may have gotten a teeny bit of Hall of Fame consideration, but it wasn't meant to be. Obviously, if the Texans could go back, they would take Aaron Donald in a heartbeat. But Jadeveon Clowney has been perfectly fine as a pass rusher. 2015, the year of Famous Jameis. I'm going to be straight to the point. Famous Jameis is the personification of the disappointed tier. He is by no means terrible. He has had by no means a bad career. Hell, he's entering year 10 and he's still sticking around. But the fact that his legacy, his everlasting legacy in the NFL will be that 30-30 season he had in 2019. So I don't think he could be any higher than cool, I guess. He never made the playoffs. I still don't think he's ever made the playoffs, actually. Never made the postseason, was never an elite quarterback at any point in his career. Even in his first, I think his rookie season was his best season statistically, and even then, it wasn't all that, and the Buccaneers were never able to go to the playoffs with him, much less have a chance of making a run at a Super Bowl, and ultimately, the year they ditched him for Tom Brady, the year they finally broke through and got that ring. So Jameis Winston belongs in the disappointed tier. At the start of his career, it looked like Jared Goff was going to be one of the worst quarterbacks we have ever seen. He was abysmal in his rookie year, but once again, he was stuck with the one and only Jeff Fisher. And once he was shown the door and replaced with Sean McVay, his career took off, even making a Super Bowl in 2018, aided by the worst call in NFL history. But it is what it is. The Super Bowl run still happened. His legacy as a Ram will take a little bit of a hit since he got traded for Matthew Stafford. And in year one, without Jared Goff, they proceeded to win a Super Bowl. And while Jared Goff has found a very nice second life as a Lion, and the Super Bowl run gives him at least some credence as a Ram, he did not do enough to become the franchise savior they thought they were going to get. So he once again joins the cool, I guess, tier. 2017, the first of two back-to-back Cleveland Browns first overall picks, and the first one is Texas A&M's Myles Garrett. Now, when it comes to someone like Garrett, there are people who will say the Browns, in hindsight, would have taken Patrick Mahomes. And frankly, don't kill me, I don't know if that was the case. With how much of a dumpster fire the Browns were at the time, I'm not too sure they would have molded Patrick Mahomes into the franchise icon he is now. And Myles Garrett is going to be, no doubt, one of the best pass rushers to ever do it. He has had multiple elite seasons in a row. I believe he has a Defensive Player of the Year. I feel like every year we have Browns and Steelers fans wanting to kill each other over the Myles Garrett versus TJ Watt debate. And I feel like I've done the smart thing by staying out of it. But at the end of the day, Myles Garrett is going to be a Hall of Famer, and his entire career has come as a Cleveland Brown. So he enters the first and probably the only all-time great. Baker Mayfield, his career arc is exactly what the Cleveland Browns deserve. I went on and on about how stupid the Browns were in my last video ranking the team, so I won't go into all of that here as a Brown when we talk about Baker Mayfield, but he is kind of the personification of why the Browns are the Browns. He goes to Cleveland. It looks like he's finally at the light at the end of the tunnel, and then they screw it up for the adult at quarterback, and that franchise may never recover while Baker Mayfield is baking in Tampa Bay. So I'm kind of torn in between. I feel like you can make an argument for Baker being in any of these three tiers. He did help the Browns win a playoff game for the first time in forever. He was kind of just cool for a time, but also I'm going to do something a little bit bold. Considering how quickly the Browns cut bait, I'm going to put Baker Mayfield in inconclusive. Who knows where the Browns would be if they just stuck with Baker and kept all those draft picks and all that cap space. Maybe they'd be something greater, especially with the season he's having now. It's going to be one of the all-time what-ifs when the Browns completely ran their franchise into the dirt by trading for Deshaun Watson. Kyler Murray, he has had a very interesting career arc. At the beginning of his career and for the first couple years, I was calling Kyler Murray overrated. But to be honest with you, ever since he signed that contract, I actually think he's become underrated. The whole league freaking hates his guts for some reason, all because he's short and because I guess he plays video games. But he's a solid quarterback. Is he good? Does he warrant the first overall pick? Probably not. But he has been by no means a bad player. And I do think he deserves more respect than he gets. I don't think he's quite a franchise savior. He hasn't won a playoff game yet. And in the one playoff game he was in, it wasn't even competitive. But like I said in my ranking video a couple weeks ago, I think if the Cardinals keep building with the foundation they have, they could be something in the future. For now, I'm going to put them in the cool, I guess, tier, but I think there is enough time for Kyler Murray to do something about it. Joe Burrow, he is very much a franchise savior. His career is obviously nowhere near over, and although injuries are starting to slow him down, and it is starting to be a concern of how open the Bengals Super Bowl window is with how much injuries stopped the last Bengals season and how much the defense has halted this one despite Burrow having one of the best seasons of his career. I think people forget, now that the Bengals are relevant again, I think people forget how bad they were for so long. Guys, they didn't win a playoff game for 30 years. And then Joe Burrow comes in and you go Super Bowl, conference championship appearance. People on Twitter like to make fun of the Bengals for bragging about losing in the Super Bowl, which I understand. But I do think people need to put that in context. The Bengals were so bad for so long. Then you get Burrow, you get Chase and Higgins, and next thing you know, they're an AFC top dog for a couple years. And I think that alone is able to put you in franchise savior. If Burrow can get more playoff runs under his belt, he can graduate to all-time great. But for now, I think I need to see a little bit more. Trevor Lawrence. Look, everyone loved him coming out of college. We all, when we talk about Trevor Lawrence, we gave him a pass for his really bad rookie season because of Urban Meyer. And then he goes on a great playoff run in 2022. And we are all convinced he is the next big thing. And he hasn't replicated it since. Injuries, up and down play, lots of turnovers. I'm sorry, he's going in disappointed. I know he had that one really good playoff run, and so did Alex Smith. And you know what? I'm probably being a bit harsh here. You know what? I'm going to change my tune. I will go into the cool, I guess, tier when it comes to Trevor Lawrence. Some of you might not like that. But if Alex Smith is going to be here for one good playoff run, I do think I do need to do the same for Trevor. And again, this is the Jacksonville Jaguars we're talking about, who just don't seem capable of building a franchise. They don't seem to know what they're doing. So the fact that they have had any success with Trevor is leading towards giving him some credit. And they were on pace to do it again in 2023 until that ankle injury slowed him down, and that franchise hasn't recovered since. But again, they're the Jaguars. Next man up might end up being this decade's Eric Fisher when it comes to forgotten first overall picks. We have Travon Walker. As of right now, a lot of you may have actually forgotten who he is because no one seemed to talk about him. Everyone just talks about how good Aiden Hutchinson is in Detroit. But Travon Walker has been by no means a bad player. He had a really bad rookie year, but then in 2023, he got 10 sacks, and so far this year has 8.5. 18.5 sacks in 2 years is by no means bad. So I do think he's a solid player, and he's probably worthy of getting a decent little contract extension to if he can keep this up in 2025. I'm teetering on the edge of inconclusive, but given what he's done in the last 2 years, he's a good player, but by no means a franchise changer. I do think he's he's a better player than Trevor, if that makes any sense, I would say. But I do think they both belong in the cool, I guess, tier. I'm going to keep it quick with the last two. Bryce Young and Caleb Williams are both going to be inconclusive. We have no idea what their careers are going to be. Caleb Williams, everyone's freaking out over him. Everyone hated him coming into the draft because he painted his fingernails and has a pink iPhone, so everyone now thinks he's going to be a bust. And because in his first year, he's not Peyton Manning, everyone thinks he is a bust. Guys, calm down. The Bears don't know how to build a winner, kind of like the Jaguars. They got rid of Eberflus. If they finally pony up the dough to get the right coach and they get Ben Johnson, I think Caleb Williams can become that one-of-one quarterback we thought he would be. But just guys, be patient. And I'm going to say the same thing with Bryce Young. Last year, heck, if his rookie trajectory carried over, he might have gone all the way down into the Jamarcus Russell tier. But he has shown a nice stretch of play recently that I think shows he's worth building around. If the Carolina Panthers, this might be a bit too big of an ask, but if David Tepper can actually just stay out of the way and let the Panthers build something and give Bryce Young a chance to play with an actual roster, I do think he's worth taking seriously because he had a couple of really good games. And some of his highlights, like that throw he had against the Eagles where he tight-roped it down the sideline from his own end zone, is really impressive. So I do think the upside for Bryce Young is there. Just give him time. And that wraps up my second little podcast-style video. We ranked every first overall pick since 2000. It might surprise you that through 25 years, there's only one all-time great, but I do think that's where these guys stand. The 5 quarterbacks that are franchise savior, I think either lack the ceiling, lack the health, or lack the luck to make it all the way up here. And there is time for Joe Burrow to graduate into the all-time great tier. He's not even 30 years old yet, but I have to judge on what they've done so far. And so far, ultimately, the last couple years have been pretty underwhelming, although making a Super Bowl is definitely not nothing. But with that being said, that wraps this video up. Hopefully, my next video will be my next big, heavy project. And if y'all enjoyed, make sure you like and subscribe. Again, if these keep doing well, I'm going to keep making them. And that being said, I will catch you all in the next video. Peace!